When my husband opened the banking app that Sunday morning, the color drained from his face so completely that I thought he might actually pass out. He stood there in the kitchen doorway, still in his gray Henley and weekend socks, phone trembling in his hand, mouth opening and closing like he was trying to form words that simply wouldn't come. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, watching him over the rim of my mug, and I didn't say a single thing. I just waited. Because I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. But let me back up, because if I start here, you won't understand what it cost me to get to that kitchen, to that silence, to that look on his face. 5 years. That's how long I was married to Derek Calloway. 5 years of believing that what we had was a partnership. 5 years of thinking that because I was the one who was good with money, his words, always his words, I could absorb whatever came at us financially and just figure it out. 5 years of slow, quiet drowning, dressed up to look like love. I'm Nora, 54 years old, licensed architect, 22 years with the same firm in a leafy suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. I designed homes for a living. Beautiful, carefully planned spaces where families were supposed to feel safe. The irony of that is not lost on me. The suburb where we lived was the kind of place that looks like a catalog photo in October. Mature maples dropping copper and red leaves on sidewalks, HOA-approved wreaths going up on front doors right after Halloween, neighbors waving from driveways on their way to the farmer's co-op or soccer practice. From the outside, our house on Wentworth Circle looked like every other well-maintained colonial on the block. Cream siding, black shutters, a Japanese maple in the front yard that blazed orange every fall like it was showing off. Inside, I had a 15-year-old cat named Ptolemy who moved like he had all the time in the world and slept on the heating vent in the hallway from October through March. He was my cat from before Derek, before the marriage, before any of this. Gray-muzzled and slow now, but still present, still mine. And I had my best friend, Gwen Hartley. I need you to understand who Gwen was to me before I tell you what Gwen did. We had been friends since our late 20s, met at a continuing education seminar on sustainable design, bonded over terrible conference coffee and a mutual contempt for the presenter's PowerPoint slides. She was a real estate attorney, razor sharp, funny in a dry, understated way that made you feel clever just for catching the joke. She was the maid of honor at my first wedding, the one who sat with me through my divorce 11 years before I met Derek, the one who drove me to urgent care at 2 a.m. when I thought I was having a heart attack, and it turned out to be a panic attack. She was the person I called first, for everything. I met Derek at Gwen's birthday dinner. That detail matters. I want you to hold on to it. He was charming in an easy, unguarded way that I wasn't used to. I'd spent my career around architects and engineers, precise, analytical people who measured twice before speaking. Derek was a high school history teacher, and he had that quality that good teachers have, this ability to make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was 51 when we met, recently widowed, with an adult son in Portland he talked about with uncomplicated warmth. He laughed at his own jokes, but was genuinely funny, so you forgave it. He remembered details about things you'd mentioned weeks earlier. He made you feel seen. We dated for 2 years before we got married. A small ceremony at a venue on the Scioto River, late June, wildflowers and soft string lights. Gwen stood beside me. I remember thinking, standing there with the sun going down over the water, that I had earned this. After the first marriage ending the way it did, after a decade of building my career and my savings and my life largely alone, I had found something real, something steady. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, or maybe what I genuinely could not see, was that Derek had a relationship with money that was fundamentally different from mine. Not irresponsible, exactly. That would have been easier to name. It was more like a kind of casual amnesia about financial consequences. He earned a teacher's salary, which in Ohio is modest, and he spent it without particular anxiety about what came next. He had a car loan when we married. He had some credit card debt he described as manageable. He had a 401k he admitted he hadn't really looked at in 3 years. None of that was disqualifying. I made good money. I had savings. I had a financial advisor I'd worked with for a decade. I thought we could build something together. What I didn't fully account for was his mother. Lorraine Calloway was 78 years old and lived alone in Dayton, in the house where Derek had grown up. She was not sick exactly, but she was aging in the way that requires ongoing management, doctor's appointments, house maintenance, the occasional financial emergency that always somehow became Derek's problem, and therefore, over time, our problem. Derek had been sending her money informally for years before we got together. Small amounts, 50 here, 100 there. After we married, those amounts grew. And they grew in a way that was never discussed directly, just absorbed, the way water gets absorbed into soil until the ground is saturated, and you only realize it when you step outside and your shoes sink in. The first year of our marriage, I noticed a pattern. Transfers from our joint account, always in round numbers, always on a Tuesday or Wednesday, always to an account labeled Mom. I asked about it once, gently, in what I thought was a productive conversation tone. "She had a plumbing thing," Derek said. "I'll tell you when it's a big deal." I accepted that. I shouldn't have, but I did. By year 2, the amounts were larger and more frequent. I started keeping a separate mental ledger. I didn't confront it directly because I told myself I was being careful, choosing my battles, not being controlling. But the truth is that Gwen, my brilliant, perceptive divorce attorney best friend, kept telling me it was fine. "Derek loves his mom," she said, over wine in my kitchen one October evening while Ptolemy supervised from the counter. "That's not a red flag, Nora. That's a green flag. You want a man who takes care of his family." I believed her. I believed her completely, because I trusted her more than I trusted my own instincts. By year 3, I had quietly begun to notice that my personal savings account, not the joint account, my individual savings, the one I'd built over 2 decades of careful, disciplined living, was being supplemented more heavily each month to cover what the joint account couldn't. Derek didn't know the specifics of my personal account, but he knew, in the way people know things they don't say out loud, that I would cover whatever needed covering, because I was good at saving, because I always figured it out. He said it like it was a compliment. He said it the way people say things they mean to be affectionate, but that are actually a kind of quiet permission. "You're so good at this, so I don't have to be." Then, in the 5th year, this past October, when the Japanese maple in the front yard was burning its brightest orange and Ptolemy had started sleeping 18 hours a day, and I was 54 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, Derek sat down across from me at the kitchen table one Saturday morning with his coffee and his phone and announced it like it was good news. "Well, honey, the car loan is finally paid off," he said, genuinely pleased, the way you'd announce a sports score. "So now we'll be sending that $600 a month to my mom. You're so good at saving anyway, so I figured you'd be happy about this." $600, every month, to Lorraine. Without a conversation, without a question, without a moment of consideration that this was a joint decision about our joint finances. Just an announcement, a foregone conclusion, because I was good at saving. I sat there across from him, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not exactly. More like a door closing very quietly. A decision being made somewhere deep and wordless. I didn't say anything. I picked up my coffee. I looked at him. He picked up his phone to make the transfer. He opened the banking app. And that's when everything stopped. His face went through about 4 different expressions in about 3 seconds. Confusion, then a frown, then something closer to alarm, then this particular kind of stillness that I recognized as the moment when a person realizes the ground beneath them is not where they thought it was. "Nora," he said. His voice had changed entirely. What is this?" I set down my mug. I looked at him steadily. And I said the truest thing I had said to him in probably 2 years. "That's the result of me being good at saving." He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at me, then back at the screen. "The joint account," he said slowly. Nora, it's showing a balance of $412. "Yes," I said. We had almost $9,000 in here last month." "We did," I said. He set the phone down on the counter very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and pressed both palms flat against the edge of the granite, like you needed something solid to hold on to. I watched him do it. I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee mug and I didn't move. "Where did it go?" he asked, and his voice had that particular quality of someone who already knows the answer is going to be bad and is asking anyway because not asking feels worse. "I moved it," I said, "over the past 3 weeks, in increments small enough not to trigger an automatic notification." The silence in that kitchen was extraordinary. Outside, I could hear the Mendoza's kid 2 houses down, doing something with a leaf blower. Ptolemy made his slow, deliberate way down the hall and settled in the kitchen doorway, watching us both with the ancient, unimpressed gaze of a cat who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. "You moved our money," Derek said. Not a question anymore, a statement he was testing the weight of. "I moved my money," I said. "The portion of every direct deposit I've contributed to this household over 5 years that exceeded your contribution. I've been keeping a spreadsheet. It's very detailed. I'm happy to share it with you." That landed. I saw it land. Here's the thing about that morning, and I need to be honest about this, because I'm not interested in making myself sound cleaner than I was. I had not been calm and strategic for 5 years. For most of those 5 years, I had been confused, and then quietly miserable, and then something I can only describe as hollowed out. The spreadsheet was real, and the transfers were real, and the calculation behind them was real. But none of it had come from a place of cool, composed foresight. It had come from a night 4 weeks earlier, when I hit what I can only call an absolute wall. It was a Wednesday in mid-September. Derek was at a teacher's professional development day and wasn't home until 7. I had gotten off a difficult call with a client at 4:30, driven home in traffic that took 45 minutes to go 11 miles, walked in the door to find that the dishwasher had stopped mid-cycle and left standing water in the bottom of the tub, and sat down at the kitchen table to look at our bank statements because I had a vague, low-grade anxiety about the numbers that I'd been ignoring for weeks. I pulled up 3 months of statements. I made a list on a yellow legal pad, the kind I keep in my work bag for site notes. I wrote down every transfer to Lorraine's account. I wrote down what Derek had contributed to our joint account from his paychecks over the same period. I wrote down what I had contributed. And then I sat there with my pen in my hand and looked at what I had written for a very long time. Over those 3 months, Derek had transferred a total of $1,100 to his mother. Not $600 yet. That was the new proposed amount, but the informal version that had been growing steadily. He had contributed roughly $1,800 a month to the joint account. I had contributed $3,200 a month, plus I had covered 2 unexpected expenses, a car repair and a vet bill for Ptolemy, from my personal savings because the joint account had been low. The transfers to Lorraine had been coming out of the joint account, which meant they had been funded disproportionately by my deposits. I had known this in a general, impressionistic way for a long time. Seeing it written down in my own handwriting on a yellow legal pad was different. It was the difference between sensing that a room smells wrong and turning on the light to find out why. I sat at that table for 2 hours. I didn't cry. I was past crying about this in the way that you get past crying about something when you've cried about it so many times in private that the well has just run dry. I was in that cold, clear space that comes after grief has finished with you for the moment and left behind something harder and more purposeful. I picked up my phone. I almost called Gwen. I had my thumb over her name in my contacts when I stopped. And that's where it gets complicated, because here's what I knew about Gwen that I had been not knowing for quite a while. She had been having lunch with Derek, regularly, at a Thai place on 5th Avenue, downtown, on Wednesdays, which was when Derek had his prep period extended and I was typically in client meetings. I knew this because Claudette, who was a junior architect at my firm and ate lunch near that restaurant every week, had mentioned it once, casually, in the context of recommending the restaurant. "Oh, isn't that near where Derek meets your friend Gwen? I've seen them there a few times." She'd said it with complete innocence, the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows, and then she'd gone back to talking about the green curry. I had filed it away. I had told myself it was nothing. Gwen was a real estate attorney. Derek knew people in the community through the school. They were both my people. Of course they knew each other. Of course they talked. I had told myself this so convincingly that I had almost believed it. But sitting at that table on that September Wednesday, with my yellow legal pad and my spreadsheet brain fully engaged, I stopped almost believing it. I thought about how Gwen had consistently, over 5 years, reassured me that Derek's financial patterns were fine, normal, even admirable. I thought about how she had never once, in 5 years of being my closest friend and a divorce attorney by profession, suggested that I protect myself financially. Not once. Not a single, "Hey, just as a friend who happens to know about these things, have you thought about keeping your accounts separate?" Nothing. From a woman who gave that exact advice to clients every day. I thought about the birthday dinner where I met Derek, Gwen's birthday dinner, the way she had specifically seated us next to each other, the way she had described him to me beforehand, widowed, lovely, you'll like him, Nora, just come. I sat with all of that for a long time, and I made a decision. I did not call Gwen. Instead, I called a woman named Patricia Osei, who was a financial advisor I'd met at a conference 2 years earlier, and whose card I'd kept in the back of my wallet, without entirely knowing why. Patricia worked with women in exactly the kinds of situations I was trying to understand. I had her cell number because she'd written it on the back of the card herself and said, "If you ever just need to think something through, call me." I had thought that was a generous, somewhat unusual thing to say to someone you'd just met. Now I thought it might have been the most important thing anyone said to me in the last decade. She answered on the third ring. It was 6:15 in the evening. "Patricia," I said, "this is Nora Calloway. We met at the Midwest Residential Design Conference in 2022. You gave me your card." "I remember you," she said without any surprise in her voice. "The architect from Columbus." "Yes," I said. "I think I need to talk to someone who isn't involved in my life." "That's usually when people call me," she said. "Tell me what's happening." I told her. All of it. The contributions, the transfers, the spreadsheet, the legal pad, Gwen, the Thai restaurant, the 5 years of being good at saving as a substitute for being an equal partner in my own marriage. I talked for almost 40 minutes. Patricia listened, and when I finally stopped, she was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "First question. Do you have a separate personal savings account that Derek doesn't have access to?" "Yes," I said. "He knows it exists, but he doesn't know the balance." "What's in it?" I told her the number. "Good," she said. "That's your foundation. Now here's what I want you to do before you do anything else, and before you say a single word to your husband or anyone in your shared social circle. Are you listening?" "Yes," I said. "Document everything. Every transfer, every date, every amount. Pull statements going back to the beginning of the marriage. Make copies. Keep them somewhere Derek can't access. Not in your house, not in your email, not in any account he knows about. And then, when you have the full picture in front of you, I want you to call a family law attorney. Not to file anything, just to understand what you're looking at." "I know a divorce attorney," I said. "She's my best friend." There was a pause. "Use a different one," Patricia said. 3 weeks. That's how long it took me to do what Patricia told me to do. 3 weeks of pulling statements, making copies, building the complete picture of 5 years on paper. 3 weeks of depositing my paycheck into my personal account instead of the joint one, in amounts calibrated carefully so the joint account stayed functional but stopped growing. 3 weeks of normal Saturday mornings and Tuesday dinners, and Ptolemy sleeping on the heating vent, while inside I was quietly, methodically building something Derek had no idea was being built. I found a family law attorney named Deborah Shin, who had a small office in Worthington and a reputation, according to 3 different online reviews, for being relentlessly prepared. I liked that. I made an appointment. I went alone on a Thursday afternoon, told Derek I had a client walkthrough. Deborah Shin was 50, compact, with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head, and a habit of writing things down the moment you said them. I laid out everything I had in front of her. She read through my documentation without speaking for about 12 minutes. Then she looked up. "You've done good work here," she said. "I'm an architect," I said. "I document things." "Do you want to save the marriage or protect yourself?" she asked. Not unkindly, just directly. I thought about Derek's face that Saturday morning, his easy, unguarded pleasure at delivering what he thought was good news. The way, "You're so good at saving," had functioned in his mind as a complete and sufficient conversation about $600 a month of my money going to his mother indefinitely. The way Gwen had looked at me across my own kitchen table for 5 years and said nothing that a real friend should have said. "Both," I said, "in that order. But I need to know what protecting myself actually looks like first." Deborah nodded and started writing. And that was where I was. 3 weeks of documentation, 1 meeting with a divorce attorney, 1 phone call with Patricia that I'd been replaying in my head every day since, when Derek sat across from me at the kitchen table on that Sunday morning in October, picked up his phone to transfer $600 to his mother, opened the banking app, and stopped breathing. "That's the result of me being good at saving," I'd said. He stared at the screen. Then he looked up at me, and what I saw in his face wasn't just confusion anymore. There was something underneath the confusion, a flicker of something that looked almost like fear, which told me that whatever he had been assuming about our finances, about me, about what I knew and what I didn't, it had just shifted. He opened his mouth. "Nora," he said, "we need to talk about this." "We do," I said. I picked up my coffee mug and wrapped both hands around it and looked at him steadily. "But before we do, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that the answer matters more than you probably think it does right now." He nodded, slowly. "How long," I said, "have you been meeting Gwen for lunch on Wednesdays?" The question sat in the air between us like something with weight. Derek's hands were still flat against the granite countertop. He didn't move them. He didn't look away from me either, which I hadn't expected. I had expected deflection, a laugh, a shrug, some version of, "What are you talking about?" But instead he went very still, and in that stillness I saw the answer before he spoke a single word. "A while," he said. "How long is a while, Derek?" He exhaled through his nose. "About a year, maybe a little more." A year. I let that number exist in the room for a moment. I didn't perform shock because I wasn't shocked. I was something else. Confirmed. There is a particular sensation that comes when the thing you have been afraid to know turns out to be exactly what you suspected. And it is not relief exactly. And it is not devastation exactly. It is more like the moment when a bone you've been walking on for weeks finally gets x-rayed and the fracture shows up clean and clear on the film, and the doctor says, "Yes, there it is." And part of you thinks, "I knew it. I knew it the whole time." "Does she know?" I asked. He looked confused for half a second. "Does who, Nora? It's not like that." "I didn't ask what it was like," I said. "I asked if Gwen knows that I know." Another pause. Longer this time. "No," he said. "Good," I said. "Then I'd like you to call her, right now, and ask her to come over." He stared at me. "Why?" "Because she's been sitting across from me in this kitchen for 5 years giving me advice about my marriage," I said. "And I think she should have to do that in person one more time." I want to say I was serene about it. I want to say I had arrived at some elevated plane of equanimity where nothing could touch me. But that would be a lie. And I promised myself when I started telling this story that I wouldn't lie. My hands were cold. There was a pressure behind my sternum that felt like something compressed and waiting. Ptolemy had moved from the kitchen doorway to underneath my chair, which he only did when the energy in a room changed in ways he didn't like. I could feel the warm weight of him against my feet. Derek called Gwen. I heard his voice from the hallway, low and careful, and I didn't try to listen to what he said. I sat at my kitchen table, and I looked at the Japanese maple through the window. And I thought about the first time I had seen that tree, standing in the driveway with the realtor, 8 years before I met Derek. The afternoon I bought this house alone after my first marriage ended. I had stood there and looked at that tree and thought, this is mine. I built this. Whatever comes next, this is mine. She arrived in 22 minutes. She was in weekend clothes, jeans, a fleece pullover, hair pulled back. She had her keys still in her hand when she walked in, and she was already composing her face into something that looked like concerned but calm, the expression of a woman who had decided on the drive over what register to inhabit. I recognized it because I had seen it on her face 100 times across my own kitchen table, and I had always read it as warmth. Sitting here now, I read it as preparation. "Nora," she said. She looked at Derek, then back at me. "What's going on?" "Sit down, Gwen," I said. She sat. Derek stood near the counter, arms crossed, not quite looking at either of us. I had a folder on the table. I had put it there before Derek woke up that morning. I opened it, and I placed 3 pages in front of Gwen. The first was a printed summary of the financial contributions to the joint account over 5 years, with the transfers to Lorraine highlighted in yellow. The second was a statement from Patricia Osei's firm, dated 2 weeks prior, confirming the transfer of funds from the joint account into a separately held account in my name only. The third was a single page from Deborah Shin's office, not a filing, not a petition, just a document confirming that I had retained her as counsel. Gwen looked at the pages. She was quiet for a long time. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I'm not here to have an emotional scene. I'm not here to cry or throw things or ask you why. I've already done all of that privately, over several weeks, and I'm finished with it. What I want is very simple. I want you to tell me, while Derek is standing in this room and can hear you, whether you ever, at any point in the last 5 years, advised me to protect my financial interests in this marriage." Gwen looked up from the papers. Her expression had shifted. The prepared composure was gone. What was underneath it was harder to name, something between guilt and a kind of desperate calculation. "Nora, the lunches were just—" "I didn't ask about the lunches," I said. "I asked about the financial advice." A long silence. "No," she said finally, "I didn't." "You give that advice to clients every day," I said. "You gave it to Margot Weller. You gave it to Diane Cho, both of whom told me so, in passing over the years. You told them to keep separate accounts, to document contributions, to understand what they were entitled to. You never said one word of that to me." Gwen's jaw tightened. "You weren't my client." "No," I said. "I was your best friend, which should have made it more likely, not less." Derek made a sound. Not a word, more like the sound a person makes when they understand, for the first time, the full architecture of a situation they thought they understood. I looked at him. He was looking at Gwen, and what was on his face was not the expression of a man confronting his secret. It was the expression of a man realizing he had been a moving piece in something larger than he knew. "How long?" he said slowly, not to me but to Gwen. "Were you planning to let this go?" Gwen didn't answer. "She introduced us," he said, more to himself than to either of us, working it out in real time. "She put us together. She's been—" He stopped. He looked at me. "Nora." "I know," I said. "I didn't know it was—" He stopped again, ran a hand over his face. "I thought the lunches were just— I don't know what I thought." "I believe you," I said, and I did, mostly. Derek was many things, financially oblivious, too comfortable with assumptions, too willing to let me absorb what he didn't want to think about. But the particular kind of strategic manipulation that I was now looking at across my kitchen table was not Derek's skill set. It was Gwen's. What I understood, sitting there that morning, was that Gwen had spent 5 years managing the situation. She had introduced us deliberately. I would probably never know exactly why, whether it was loneliness or some complicated thing she felt for Derek that she'd wrapped in the packaging of generosity, or something else entirely. And then she had kept herself positioned as my closest confidant, while consistently steering me away from any action that might have destabilized what she'd built. Every reassurance she'd given me had served her. Every, "He's just devoted to his mother, Nora, that's a good thing," had kept me in place. I looked at her and I felt, in that moment, something I hadn't expected. I felt sorry for her. Not enough to change what I was doing, but sorry, the way you feel sorry for someone who has built a life on a foundation that was always going to give way. "I want you to leave," I said. Not dramatically, just, "I'd like you to go." She stood up. She picked up her keys from the table where she'd set them. She looked at me for a moment, and I saw her start to say something and then decide against it. Then, she walked out of my kitchen, through my front door, and down the driveway past the Japanese maple, and I watched her go. The room was very quiet after that. Ptolemy emerged from under my chair and walked to his water bowl with the unhurried authority of a creature who had never once in his 17 years wasted energy on a situation he couldn't influence. Derek sat down across from me. He looked older than he had 20 minutes ago. He put his hands on the table and looked at them. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not just for the money, for all of it, for assuming you'd absorb whatever I didn't want to deal with and just keep going." "You do," I said. "Are you," he paused, "are you done with the marriage?" I thought about that for a moment, not performing the thought, actually having it. "I don't know yet," I said. "I have a meeting with Deborah Shin on Thursday. I'm going to hear what she says, and then I'm going to make a decision based on what I want, not on what's easiest or what avoids a difficult conversation, which is apparently something I should have been doing for 5 years. He nodded. He didn't argue. That, more than anything, was the first real thing he'd done in the whole of that morning. I will tell you what happened after because you deserve the full picture. Derek and I separated in November. It was not vicious. Deborah Shin was relentlessly prepared as advertised, and the financial documentation I had built over those 3 weeks made the division of assets straightforward. Derek kept the car and his retirement account. I kept the house on Wentworth Circle, the savings I had transferred, and my own 401k. He moved into an apartment near the high school in January. We signed the final paperwork in March, on a cold, bright morning in Deborah's office in Worthington, and when it was done, we sat in the parking lot for a few minutes in our separate cars, and I think we both understood that what had ended was not entirely without value, just not survivable. Some things are both. Gwen and I have not spoken since that Sunday morning. I don't expect we will. The loss of her is something I still feel, the way you feel the absence of a tooth, not constantly, not incapacitating, but present in certain moments, a gap where something used to be. I have not replaced her. I don't think you replace that kind of friendship. You just keep going without it, and eventually the going becomes its own shape. Ptolemy made it to 18. He died on a Tuesday afternoon in February, on the heating vent in the hallway, in the sun that came through the window at 3 o'clock. I was home when it happened, which I'm grateful for. I sat with him until he was gone. And then I sat there a little longer, because he had been in my life since before Derek, before the marriage, before any of this. And some things deserve more than a practical response. Patricia Osei and I meet quarterly now. She is not just my financial advisor. She has become something closer to a compass. She asks me hard questions and writes down my answers, and doesn't tell me what I want to hear, which is exactly what I needed and never quite had. I still design homes. I still think carefully about the spaces where families are supposed to feel safe. I know now, in a way I didn't fully know before, that the outside of a house, the cream siding, the black shutters, the tree in the front yard blazing orange like it's showing off, tells you almost nothing about what's happening inside. You have to actually go in. You have to look at the bones of the thing. You have to be willing to see what's there, even when what's there is a fracture you've been walking on for years. The Japanese maple is blooming now. It's May. The tree doesn't know anything about what happened in the house it stands in front of. It just does what it does, every season, with the same uncomplicated commitment to its own nature. I think about that sometimes, about what it would mean to live that way, to just be entirely, unapologetically what you are, and let the seasons do what they do, and keep going. I'm working on it.